Last part we discussed the end of Angmar in detail. Today we look into the aftermath of it, mostly what is happening east and south of the Misty Mountains, including the dwarves, the Fall of Moria and the problems Gondor is facing. We of course also keep Elrond's perspective in mind because this is still part of the Who is Elrond video, but of course this part works if you have not seen the other parts yet. My name is Chris, aka ThePhilosophersGames, and before we start, a few hints as always. I try to pronounce names as Tolkien described it, which means there will be trilled R's. Shout outs to the artists who allowed me to use their fantastic artworks like Kimberly80, Sarah Morello, Ted Naismith, Jenny Dolphin, and all the others. Also, spoiler warning. We stopped at Glorfindel making his prophecy to Arnor, the son of the king of Gondor, at the very end of the Angmar War. It included the advice to not pursue the Witch King further into the Ettenmoors and that he will not fall by the hands of men. Arnor listened to this advice, but as we will learn, he might have not fully understood the weight of this prophecy. I guess Glorfindel could also be quite convincing, and so ended the realm of Angmar, and the Witch King fled to Mordor, where he gathered the Nazgul and planned his next devastating attack around 3rd Age 2000. But let us stay in Eriador for a moment. According to Appendix B, the Witch King was pursued into the Ettenmoors. When we skip back to the foundation of Angmar, we can read in Appendix A, for at that time the realm of Angmar arose in the north beyond the Ettenmoors. It's interesting that the Moors are mentioned here again, maybe hinting at him going north from there. It's also where Gandalf lured the 4 Nazgul that followed him from Weathertop in The Lord of the Rings. It almost seems like the Ettenmoors encompass the story of Angmar like a bracket, considering they are mentioned so little in the books in general. The Angmar War ended around 3rd Age 1975. Arvedui's son Aranarth takes the title Chieftain of the Dúnedain because there was not much left of his father's realm and he decided to not take kingship. Though Angmar was defeated, so was Arnor, or what was left of it in the form of Arthedain. The worst case part of Malbeth's prophecy happened and Arvedui, which as we learned means last king, lived up to his name. In a best case scenario, he would have survived becoming a king of a great realm and he would have received a new name, but that did not happen. The hobbits, who had a deal with the king, now also became, you could say, independent and elected their first Thane. Baka, not sure about the old English pronunciation, maybe Butcher. They for sure had to recover from the war as well. This outcome and new independence might have also isolated them further, which helped probably a lot not being in the sight of the wise and powerful. Of course, hobbits lived in Bree too, but Arnor was no powerful realm anymore and far away from Gondor. It was built at a crossroad of important trade routes, and one of them, the North Road to Fornost, should not be needed as much anymore. As a result, it fell to ruin and was overgrown with grass, which is why it will be known as Greenway for future generations. Only the Great East Road was still in frequent use, which led from around Mithlond and the Blue Mountains to Rivendell. According to Appendix A, the Dúnedain also went to the Lothoth in the far north and ransomed the Ring of Barahir. We don't know what the Lothoth got for it though, but I can imagine that Dúnedain would honor Arvedui's words. It was brought along with the shards of Narsil, the new star of Elendil, probably made in Rivendell for Isildur's son, the original was lost with Isildur, and the scepter of Anúminas to Elrond in Rivendell, where those heirlooms were stored from now on. The idea of Narsil being in Rivendell we see in Peter Jackson's film of course contradicts the book, but still has a foundation in the lore. Also, Aranarth's son Arahail was brought to Rivendell, where he was fostered, and here the tradition of the line of kings growing up in Rivendell was renewed and also continued from now on. We remember Isildur's only surviving son, who according to Lord of the Rings definitely was born in Rivendell and lived there as child. It became a tradition that the heirs of the chieftain of the Dúnedain would grow up in Rivendell until Aragorn II. We can read in Appendix Appendix A, when the kingdom ended, the Dúnedain passed into shadows and became a secret and wandering people, and their deeds and labors were seldom sung or recorded. Little now is remembered of them since Elrond departed. We see how things shift in Erebor from proud kings and a huge realm to wandering people who live in the woods. They are also all that is left of their culture and the memory of their past. Only the lawmaster Elrond knew their story well and also had great influence on them, it seems, considering how many generations of Isildur's heirs grew up in his realm. Even their greatest heirlooms were stored in Rivendell. It shows, in my opinion, that there must have been great trust and respect in Elrond and his wife Celebrian from the side of the Dúnedain of the North, and how big Elrond's and Celebrian's compassion and hospitality towards those people was. Dan, aka Voice of Geekdom, called Elrond the Steward of Middle-earth, and I think it's a very fitting way to describe him. Also, Elrond and the kings and chieftains of the Dúnedain were in a way family, because Elendil's line is related to his brother Elros, but of course many generations ago. As the elven king Turgon once welcomed the man Tuor in Gondolin, Elrond welcomed a new heir of Isildur every generation in Rivendell. That we can read he was as kind as summer makes a lot of sense in this context. Interestingly, in a very early version of The Hobbit, published in The History of the Hobbit, the phrase was as kind as Christmas. Tolkien removed it already in his first typescript with as kind as summer, I assume to avoid anachronisms, so even in the first edition of The Hobbit it's already changed. Looking at this very early draft, it also seems more clear that Elrond was not an elf there yet. For example, in the old version, he is described as he was as good to look at almost as an elf lord, which then changed to he was as noble and as fair in face as an elf lord. As a result, him still being called an elf friend in the released book seems really to be a fragment of that very early version of Elrond from 1926 we discussed at the very beginning in part 1, where he as half-elven decided to be counted towards men, maybe in combination with the terms half-elven and elf-friend not being fully developed yet. Tolkien, for the release of The Hobbit, seems to reduce that the text would give the impression that Elrond is not an elf, in my opinion. However, back to where we were. Erebor tried to slowly recover from this terrible over 560-year-long war against Angmar, but just considering the number of years alone makes it clear how devastating it must have been. Many generations knew nothing but war and fear of Angmar. Interestingly, the Dunelandings also suffered greatly from the Great Plague and moved further southeast. In the meantime, the Witch King prepared his next attack. His new target, Gondor, Minas Ithil to be precise. He still had some unfinished business, so in Mordor he gathered the Nazgûl and forces for 20 years. It's a fascinating time because we can see how evil becomes step by step more powerful. Third Age 1980, not only does the Witch King gather his forces, also the 7 Rings of Power finally bring their evil to fruition. In Khazad-dûm, the dwarves, may be driven by the greed of the 7 Rings of Power, dug too deep and only found their doom, which would change the history of the dwarves in that region dramatically. We can read about the end of the War of Wrath in the Silmarillion. The Balrogs were destroyed, save some few that fled and hid themselves in caverns inaccessible at the roots of the earth. And one of those ancient terrors of the first Dark Lord Morgoth, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm or Moria, awoke. Originally Tolkien planned armies of Balrogs, but they were less powerful. Tolkien later changed the idea to only very few Balrogs, but they were much more powerful instead. This was a change the dwarves for sure disliked, because they could not stop the Balrog, and it slew their king Durin VI, Third Age 1980, and a year later his son Nóin I. So the fight against the Balrog took some time, but in the end the dwarves lost this fight and abandoned Moria, fleeing from it. It is hard to imagine how an entire huge dwarven kingdom is destroyed and abandoned completely. It's also not any dwarven kingdom. Khazad-dûm was the dwarven kingdom, and it was even ruled by an incarnation of Durin himself. As a result, the Balrog became known as Durin's Bane, and the Misty Mountains are now far less safe for the Free Peoples due to evil creatures infesting them. We can read in Appendix B, many of the Sylvan elves of Lorien flee south. Amros and Nimrodel are lost. In addition, Frumgar, the lord of the Eotheod of that time, which were the ancestors of the people of Rohan, also led his people further to the north, I assume because the evil forces becoming stronger where they dwelt before. And 3 years later the Balrog appeared, which probably intensified the infestation of the Misty Mountains, making this a wise decision with a lot of foresight. It's also fascinating that the Balrog appears exactly after the destruction of the remains of Arnor and the Witch King returning to Mordor, planning his next move and maybe preparing it for Sauron's return. The wise, especially Elrond for sure, noticed how all these terrible events were aligning so well, but he of course was busy in Erebor. We already talked about Amros in the Second Age part, who ruled in Lothlorien before Galadriel and Celeborn. As mentioned in some versions, he is the son of Galadriel, though in later ones of Amdir, and this is a topic for its own video. However, also the elves of Lorien and surroundings felt less safe in this region, and Amros' beloved Nimrodel wanted a peaceful place to dwell. She would only marry Amros if he could bring her to such a place, so they decided to sail west to Aman. They got split, Nimrodel fell into a long deep sleep, while Amros waited for her on the ship. We talked about the elven haven Elrond in that region. And when the ships were driven off by a storm, he jumped into the sea to swim back to the coast of Middle-earth. He would not leave without Nimrodel, but was never seen again, and the area was called Dol Amros in his honor. What happened to Nimrodel afterwards, we don't know, but according to the unfinished tales, she had a companion called Mithrelas, who was found by a man of the Dúnedain named Imrazor, and he married her, and from this line were the princes of Dol Amros later. Third Age 1999. Durin's grandson Thróin I, that is not Thorin Oakenshield's father but an ancestor, traveled to Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, and founded the dwarf kingdom under the mountain. Though according to a note in Peoples of Middle-earth, the dwarves controlled Erebor and even the Grey Mountains already in the Second Age. Hard to say for how long, but it was not a kingdom at this time. However, in the Third Age, Thróin I, quote from Appendix A, began new works, so I assume built halls and started mining operations, and the Arkenstone, heart of the mountain, was found in Erebor. We talked about this briefly in the first part of this video 4 to 5 hours ago. It must also be mentioned that not all dwarves went to Erebor. Many, if not most, gathered in the Grey Mountains instead, which were rich and little explored. Here we also find the, I think, first mention of dragons in the Third Age, which lived in the waste beyond the Grey Mountains. One of the known and named dragons might be from there, which is the dragon Shatha. The name seems to be Old English, which is why the SC is pronounced as sh. I assume the TH is voiceless, but also forms with a voiced TH seem to exist. I could find the word Shatha in some online dictionaries, and with further research I found it in the Student's Dictionary of Anglo-Saxon by Henry Street from 1897. It means one who injures, public enemy, criminal, thief, fiend or warrior, but there's also the form Shatha, which seems to be more common, meaning pretty much the same. It can, for example, be found in a decline form in the Beowulf prologue. It's related with to scathe, or the German word Schaden, that means damage. The Old English name makes sense because the noble Eotheod Lord Fram was in conflict with Shatha around 3rd Age 2000. We come to that in a moment. And the language of the Eotheod is represented by Old English. This little incident hints at dragons becoming a problem in that region in the north, though after the dragon's death the region had peace for some time. The Lonely Mountain will be abandoned again around 210 years later, until much later Thorin Oakenshield's grandfather Thror returned to it again. This move might stabilize the region in the northeast, except for some trouble with the dragons. It's also really hard to say when Dale and Laketown were built. According to Thorin Oakenshield, Dale was built during his grandfather's days, so after 3rd Age 2590, though in the unfinished tales the people of Dale are mentioned at the time of Marhwini's rule over the Norsemen of Rovanion and Narmarkil II's death, the king of Gondor, which was 3rd Age 1856. These two statements contradict each other, but we can assume people lived in that region and maybe formed smaller villages that might have grown into Dale and Laketown due to the dwarves settling in or under Erebor at some point. The Norsemen may be split in some way at some point. It seems some of them might have went east into the region where Dale and Laketown is, and some became the Eotheod, the horse people, who lived around the Anduin, and went further north, 3rd Age 1977 as mentioned, where they founded Framsburg, which is named after Fram, who also slew the mentioned dragon Shatha and had a conflict with the dwarves over the Horde. This dwarf conflict might have resulted in Fram's death, and this made both peoples not the best friends. The Horn of the Mark mentioned in The Lord of the Rings was most likely from Shatha's horde. According to the unfinished tales, Gondor, of course, saw this move as unfortunate and concerning because now their trusted allies were further away from them, which might be an important detail. The Wain Riders were of course defeated by Eärnil II, driven into the Dead Marshes where they died, but they could return. There were more forces in the far east. It was also later speculated that Sauron orchestrated the Wain Riders, which were Easterlings, and the Haradrim to cooperate. To again summarize what was going on, Arnor was destroyed. A Balrog destroyed the most important dwarven kingdom, which made all its dwarves flee from Moria. Most, I guess, fled north-northeast, in addition destabilizing the region and the Misty Mountains. The Eotheod and maybe other Norsemen moved further north, like the dwarves, and as a result further away from Gondor, maybe because an evil power spread in Rovanion and becoming more and more powerful, which was Sauron, but nobody knew it yet. In addition, the Eotheod and the dwarves in the north had trouble with the dragon Shatha and a conflict with each other over the horde of the dragon afterwards. The Witch King gathered forces in Mordor, which was also not guarded by a weakened Gondor anymore, and on top of that, many Sylvan elves of Lorien, including their king Amros, also left the region wandering south to sail west, ending in their ruler Amros drowning. These must have been really tough times, and you see how all these events happen almost in parallel. With Amros gone, Galadriel and Celeborn maybe started their rule over Lothlorien, but the region is still weakened for a time, and Sauron can recover further without being disturbed. And in this time, 3rd Age 2000, the Witch King makes his move. He besieged Minas Ithil for 2 years with all his might. Faramir, in the chapter The Forbidden Pool, gives an interesting hint, quote, "It was taken by fell men whom the enemy in his first strength had dominated, and who wandered homeless and masterless after his fall. It is said that their lords were men of Numenor who had fallen into dark wickedness. To them the enemy had given rings of power, and he had devoured them. Living ghosts they were become, terrible and evil." A very peculiar version of the story, and I'm not sure what it means exactly. It seems strange that a bunch of homeless men living in the wild without a master are suddenly united again and are able to conquer a Gondorian main city in a 2-year-long siege, especially that they would have the numbers for that, and that they were as a result mentioned as the main reason for the fall of the city, and not, for example, orcs of Mordor. Further, the Silmarillion states that only 3 of the Nazgûl were Numenorians. I would offer an interpretation that these fell men were not an army of men like the hillmen in Eriador under the control of the Nazgûl, but the Nazgûl themselves. Their lords were men of Numenor, also labels the Ring race as men. Faramir gives us no exact time frame, but for sure hints at the Second Age with the words "in his Sauron's first strength" and "after his fall." We should consider a larger time frame for this quote, because Sauron's fall alone was thousands of years ago and his first strength even longer. It is said that their lords were men of Numenor who had fallen into dark wickedness. What could their lords mean in this context? My interpretation, the Nazgul in command, like the Witch King or Khamul. There was clearly a hierarchy among them. For their exact origin, we have no reliable source anyway. The Silmarillion hints that it was believed 3 of them were Numenorians, so how could Faramir know better? Only the line "9 lords there were, and after the return of their master, which they aided and prepared in secret, they grew strong again" contradicts this interpretation a bit, because now all 9 are called lords. Though it seems to me still more plausible than an unknown, homeless and masterless group of men from thousands of years ago, powerful enough to conquer a city of Gondor. On the other hand, of course, in Mordor dwelled all kinds of forces, so it's not impossible that an unknown group of men came to Mordor, dwelled there masterless, and then fought for the Nazgul, their lords, when they summoned them. Sauron was on the rise of power again. The Witch King returned to Mordor 20 years before he started to besiege Minas Ithil, and that is for sure enough time to gather and train an army. We can also read in the Silmarillion that Minas Ithil was emptied of its people due to the decline of Gondor, so it was for sure easier to conquer than when Gondor was at peak strength. You could also conclude that the Witch King saw another opportunity here, similar to Arnor, when it split into 3 separate kingdoms. However, Gondor could not hold Minas Ithil, and there was also no one who could send help. Remember, the Eotheod moved further north and Arnor was gone. This move was really worth it for Sauron and the Witch King, because this time there was no Isildur somehow saving the Palantir, which was now in possession of Sauron and his servants. On top of that, losing Minas Ithil really hurt Gondor, and it was a powerful position at its border to Mordor. Sauron now had his foot in the door. Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Moon, was now named Minas Morgul, the Tower of Black Sorcery. Minas Anor, the Tower of the Sun, was now renamed in Minas Tirith, the Tower of the Watch. But the Witch King did not stop here. Remember when we talked about Prince Earnur during the Angmar War? Third Age 2043, his father died and Earnur became king of Gondor. We can read about him. He was a man like his father in valor, but not in wisdom. He will interestingly share something with King Arvedui of Arnor. The Witch King, who once mocked him in the Angmar War, challenged him to single combat. First, Earnur declined, I think due to some wise advice he got, but Third Age 2050 the challenge was renewed, and this time he accepted. With some knights he rode to Minas Morgul and was never seen again. He left his crown in Minas Tirith and he had no heir. He was like Arvedui, the last king, but of Gondor. In contrast, he had no heir though, and Elendil's line ended in the Dúnedain kingdom of the south. And now the reign of the ruling Stuarts began with Mardil until a king would return. We know who that will be. The hands of the king are the hands of the healer, and so shall the rightful king be known, it is said in the law of Gondor. And the prophecy of Malbas turned out to be true, quote, "If not, then much sorrow and many lives of men shall pass, until the Dúnedain arise and are united again." It was not just a prophecy about the North, but about all Dúnedain of Middle-earth, North and South. And though Eärnil II looked so promising as king, his line ended with his son, but the line of Isildur was not broken in the North. Malbas, though, also made a second prophecy, which is about the heir of Isildur from the North and the Oathbreakers. These events were massive in history, and Rivendell most likely knew about them. As all those events happened, the wise also connected the dots and assumed the evil power in Dol Guldur could be connected to them around Third Age 2060. Was it Sauron hiding there? This must have been discussed. We can read in the Silmarillion, "Ever most vigilant was Mithrandir, and he it was that most doubted the darkness and Mirkwood, for though many deemed that it was wrought by the ring race, he feared that it was indeed the first shadow of Sauron returning. And he went to Dol Guldur, and the sorcerer Sauron fled from him, and there was a watchful peace for a long while." So Gandalf investigated and went to Dol Guldur to see for himself. This was 3rd Age 2063, but Gandalf could not identify the presence. As mentioned in the past, it was speculated it was one of the Nazgûl, and later they speculated that it was Sauron, but the Dark Lord was still weakened and secrecy his greatest weapon. So Sauron fled from Dol Guldur into the far east without Gandalf being able to identify him, starting a time called the Watchful Peace, in which the Nazgûl remained quiet and Middle-earth had some peace. This time of peace and how it might end we will discuss next time. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this part of Who is Elrond and that I could give you some details you were not aware of yet. I can only hint at the other parts and that we are slowly reaching the end of the 3rd Age. Looking forward to the all-in-one version. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to press the like and subscribe button, including the annoying bell. Leave a comment, recommend me to other Tolkien fans, and also check out my other videos. There's also a playlist with my best videos linked in the description. In addition, there's also a channel membership with 3 tiers if you like those. If you are not getting notified on YouTube when I upload new videos, I know YouTube has trouble with this at times, then you can follow me on Twitter or join the Discord. I post all my stuff there as well, and further try to make posts in the community tab when I upload. I also now have an Instagram account, though I'm not sure what I will post there, so not much to see there yet. Maybe tell me what you would like to see. Some Tolkien lore fun facts, unfunny memes, hints at newly uploaded videos, or simply nothing. I have to admit, it's not a platform I really use, but at least I have an account there now. I also think about getting an Amazon affiliate link, but not sure how smart this idea is. What it does, you click on the link and if you buy something specific on Amazon, they pay me a very small amount of money for it, while you don't have to pay more. On paper, it's very smart because my content is very specific and many viewers might shop using Amazon, buying books, films, etc. But on the other hand, one could argue it could give the impression of me being biased when it comes to Amazon, and it's also a terrible company. We will discuss this in a separate video, but I'm curious what people think of that. Next on my channel will be a YouTube livestream. Maybe there will be some big news. I really want to work on completing Who is Elrond though, so the next part could be the next video. I also stream games on Twitch at times, maybe check that channel as well. There is also a German lore channel and a gaming channel if you are interested, though currently I struggle filling those with content. All are linked in the description. Again, thank you for watching, for all your support, and goodbye.